Ian, and I'm very pleased to have accepted.
That might be me.
That's it.
I'll sit down.
Can't sit too close together, huh? Have accepted the invitation of the United Concerned Taxpayers Association to be the moderator of this conversation this evening. I'd like to take a minute and introduce Chris, who really probably needs no introduction to this community, but as you know, Chris grew up in Kinderhook, New York, and he's probably now the third most famous person from that neck of the woods after Martin Van Buren and Jimmy Fallon. He went to Siena College and took an ROTC commission, and after Siena served 24 years in the Army, 7 tours, including 4 tours in Iraq, also served in Kosovo and in Haiti on a humanitarian mission, and in the southwestern United States. He rose to the rank of colonel and earned many of our nation's most prestigious military decorations: Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, the Legion of Merit. And though he never talks about it, during that time he also earned a very impressive academic record. He earned a Master of Arts and a Master's of Public Administration and a doctorate from Cornell University. He's taught on the faculty of the United States Military Academy, and he has been a member of the faculty of the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. Served in Congress. Now, from this district, originally elected in 2010 in the 20th Congressional District, and after redistricting, has served in the 19th Congressional District, and he's running for re-election. And I would say, in the interest of full transparency, I have been a big fan of Chris Gibson's, and I've been and am a financial supporter of his campaign. And though we ran into each other in the airport in Baltimore a few days ago, he has no idea what questions I'm going to ask tonight and hasn't reviewed or approved any of those questions. So we've got about 90 minutes together, and my thought was I'd begin with some questions, and then I know that some of you have written questions on index cards, and we'll collect them and ask many of those as well. So, Congressman?
Yeah, well, thanks. Thank you, Mark. And can everybody hear me up there? Okay, very good. And I actually can't see you with all the lights. But I'll tell you that I'm very excited to be here. You know, when I got the word of this invite, I was very honored and excited to come. I'll tell you, for my wife and I, we cherish the friendships that we made here. After retiring from the Army in March of 2010 and taking on this calling, the folks here in Glens Falls and in the North Country really made a difference in getting us over the top. And, you know, since that time, I'll tell you, I've been working hard for the people of upstate New York. Even though there has been redistricting, I hope that the initiatives that we are advancing are making a difference up here. I want to tell you that I'm optimistic. I sit before you today optimistic about our country. You know, when I was a young boy, I remember folks saying Japan was going to bury us. They never buried us. It didn't happen. And some folks say today that China is going to economically bury us. I don't believe that either. China has significant labor issues. They have very serious environmental issues. They have million-person cities with no one in them. And you know what that impact does for the construction business. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we make some decisions that can continue our growth of the economy and get us back to a balanced budget. This is going to be our best century yet. And, you know, towards that end, we have had some actions in just the last several months that I believe have reinforced this point. The first is a budget. We have the first enacted federal budget now in 5 years. And we need to get back to the business where we do routine things routinely. You sent me there to do just that. And I will tell you that advancing that cause of getting back to a balanced budget, in part, was done through this group, No Labels, that I think we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. But I can tell you that bringing forward which was a one-year provision for no budget, no pay, ultimately, I think was the catalyst for the Senate passing its first budget in 4 years that set the conditions for the Ryan Murray budget, which is a 2-year budget that helped us get a replacement, a partial replacement for the sequester, so important to our national security and also important to our domestic priorities. And just in the importance of government operations and reducing uncertainty in the business environment. And then on the heels of that, we got a defense policy bill, and then we just got this farm bill. And I know I look forward to the questions. I'm excited to tell you about this farm bill because I think it's going to be good for upstate New York. It's going to be good for rural America. We've got a water bill coming here very soon that I think we're going to send to the president. It's going to be a good complement to the Sandy Aid bill that we passed earlier this year that not only helps us recover from storms, but actually helps, for the first time, make significant efforts to mitigate the possibility of future storms, to protect people and property. It's going to streamline the Army Corps of Engineers. It's going to reauthorize dam safety and provide funding for that. All of these priorities that are important for upstate New York. So I look forward to the evening. I thank you for the invite, and I'm ready to go.
Well, let's talk about no labels. A group of moderate Republicans and Democrats with the slogan, not left, not right, forward, and with a plan to develop a strategic agenda for the country. What is that?
So it's actually a little broader than that. The key of no labels is that it doesn't require anyone to check their principles, their views. We have 90 members of Congress. About half of them are Democrats, half of them are Republicans. About 80 of them are from the House of Representatives, about 10 are from the Senate. But what we focus on is this, and it's really inspired by, I think, a deep reverence for the Constitution. And you think about our founders, when they brought forward this exceptional way of life, the Constitution itself was a compromise. And at the time, we had different ideas about how we should form this government. We had a New Jersey plan, a Virginia plan, ultimately a Connecticut compromise was brought forward that gave us this Constitution. But the essence of the founding era was that in the absence of consensus, you keep the status quo. And that is true today. And if you believe, as I do, that the status quo is unacceptable, then by constitutional stipulation, particularly in an era of divided government, you're going to work together, or you're going to keep the status quo. So with that in mind, these are 90 members that are really focused on making a difference. And so we worked on this budget issue. This no budget, no pay bill essentially required the respective houses to actually pass a budget, or they would not, they would have their pay withheld. Because we do have a constitutional amendment that requires any change to member pay take effect in the next Congress. But still, that no budget, no pay provision, I think, was the catalyst for the Senate passing a budget that allowed for us to reach the agreement, the Ryan Murray. Now, I'm an advocate for, and this is a no labels bill that has about 90 co-sponsors, that actually would put the no budget, no pay provision into permanent law. And given the fact that we have a 2-year budget right now, the next time that we would go to do a budget, it would actually be meaningful to have teeth. Because if we don't reach a budget, then members would not have their pay withheld. They simply would not be paid. So this is an example where I think some very pragmatic members of Congress, recognizing the catalyst that this could be, came forward, and we got that bill done. We also had, we rolled out 9 bills last summer, in the summer of 2013. One of the 9 bills was a bill that I actually authored along with some doctors, Democrats from California, Dr. Barra and Dr. Ruiz. Dr. Ruiz and I actually served in Haiti together in what was my last deployment in the wake of that devastating earthquake. But we brought forward a bill that requires the Department of Defense and the Veteran Administration to merge their systems. Because right now, it's among the reasons why veterans have challenges is because, during their service in the military, when they retire and come back home, their electronic record doesn't follow them. So they have to start over again in terms of paper records. But, we brought forward a bill that requires the merging of these two systems, and it actually became law in the National Defense Policy Bill. So it's another example where no labels made a difference. We're requiring now, over a period of time, by 2016, that we have this merging of these electronic records. So now what we're doing, as you point out, Mark, is the thing we're working on this year is trying to bring our country together around a set of goals. And what we're trying to do is learn from previous history. When you look at the 1990s and you look at the 1980s, what you'll see there is during the 1980s, you had President Reagan, who was serving with the Democratic Congress at the time. And to get anything meaningful done, he had to work with Tip O'Neill and with the Democratic leadership. And what they all agreed upon was the goal of tax reform. Now, they stridently disagreed on how to get there, but they agreed on the top line goal that we needed to get a more simple, more fair tax code. And because they agreed on that goal, it took them a number of years to get there, but because they could always go back to that goal, they were able to actually get that done. And in the 1990s, you had President Clinton in a Republican Congress, and while they had, a wide array of differences, they came to an agreement that we needed to balance the budget.
But we're in a different place at this point now. I mean, how do you square that with a president who says in the State of the Union that he's independent from Congress, will act independently, will use executive authority, and will do what Congress doesn't do? Does that empower you, or does it marginalize you?
Well, I don't think that's helpful, and I ultimately don't think that that you'll see him take major action towards that end. We've got to find a way to work together, and we can. If Reagan can work with Tip O'Neill, and if President Clinton can work with the Republican Congress in the 1990s, and if we can do a farm bill like we just did, and if we can get a budget agreement, and we can get a water bill, we can do tax reform, we can do immigration reform, we can do a whole number of things together, but there has to be a commitment to getting that done, and there has to be an investment, and we've got to work on trust. This organization, one thing is we've got to know each other really well, and if you look at our bills, we co-sponsor each other's bills. You look at, I think in every case but one, a bill that I've introduced into the United States House of Representatives has Democratic co-sponsors. And it's because we've spent time building relationships so that we can listen to each other, accommodate the views, so that we can still advance the principles in a manner that can expand support. So I'm actually optimistic that this can be done.
You made the point that you don't have to check your principles at the door when you join No Labels. And you're an expert in government. Talk to me about the debate, delegate versus trustee. When those interests are at odds, how do you make a decision about voting? Do you vote your district or do you vote your principal?
So this is a great question to raise, and it actually reaches all the way back in history. Not only United States history, but actually Edmund Burke was one of the ones who wrote about this extensively from Great Britain. And my view is, in a republic, you have representative government. And this is one of the reasons why when I'm not in Washington, D.C., I'm all over our district. You can look at my Twitter account and you'll see all these various places I go, because it's my view that I have to represent our district. So I listen carefully to what I'm hearing, and I look to find ways where I can bring forward the views of the district. Now, candidly, it can be difficult. There are some issues that you have very strong views on both ends of the spectrum. And to the degree that we can, I look to find an accommodation that will be in the best interest of everybody while moving forward. And we do find that in many cases. The Farm Bill, for example. We had some constituents that were very concerned about the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and formerly known as food stamps. And look, I mean, we're a country, a compassionate country that believes that if you need assistance, we want to have that there for you. We want a program that's there for people who need it in a manner that the taxpayer can be proud of. So look, that was not an easy issue, but we worked our way through it. And in the end, we got an agreement that the President and that Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate could support. And it's my job then is to come out and to explain what it is that we did in the United States Congress to represent upstate New York communities. So ultimately, I tell you, it's my responsibility to represent our district. Now, at moments when there's a particular issue that the district may agree with me or maybe doesn't have a view, I also think it's my role to lead I'll give you an example. Based on my experience in the military, it was my judgment that if we bombed Syria, we weren't going to make it better. We were going to make it worse. But I felt a responsibility to communicate, to go out and to convince the folks in my district why they should follow me on that issue. Because, we, at the time, the president was of the mind that we should take military action. And I want to make it clear, when the president said that we need to take a stand against what Assad was doing, I agreed with that. I abhor what President Assad has done. And I think our president was right to call him out for that. But it was in my judgment that bombing the country was not the right response. That I thought the best thing that we could do was unify the world to stand and to object to what was going on and to tighten sanctions in a manner that would compel Assad. But I say this to you because initially, with the president wanting to take military action, I'm not sure where the polling would have been initially, but I felt a responsibility for several months in advance of that to go from county to county and to explain to our district why it is that I didn't think it was a good idea, based on my experience now as a representative and as a former military, why it is it would be best not to do that. And in the end, I think my district came with me.
Let's stay on that. Let's stay on national security for a minute. You're an expert in national security. You wrote a book, Securing the State, the Hoover faculty. You served at the Army Staff and Command College, graduated with honors. You said in 2011 that we need to rethink the way we deploy military force and that we need to reform our national security establishment so that we protect our cherished way of life at home. What do you mean when you say protect our national security establishment?
Yeah, no, so the first thing is I think we need to think differently. And this is another area where I've really tried to work hard to convince my district, our district, why it is that what we've been doing, regardless of who's president, whether we've had a Democratic or Republican president, I think we have been too quick to use military force. And, the results on that are ambiguous. And my view is that it's not in our interest to do that. And so when I say think differently, what I want to see us do is to lead from our strengths. I think our greatest strengths, and I say this from the vantage point of having been to about 36 different countries over the course of my life and listened to what others have said about us. And I think our greatest strength is our ideals, as instantiated in our founding documents. As a young a country as we are, we have the longest standing, stable constitution in the world. And other countries want to be like us on our best day. They want the freedom, the flourishing form of life that comes from our Constitution and from our Bill of Rights. And so that when we advance that with diplomacy and with trade policies, always backed up by the world's strongest military as a deterrent to those that would do us harm, I actually think that's the best way for us to protect our country.
Policy first.
So, peace through strength. So why I'm arguing we need to think differently is we have, in my view, we've led with our chin. We have led with military action time and time again. We think that is instinctively the right thing to do, and we can often find reasons to somehow support that. We can often, like for example in Syria, we'll point to the chemical weapons attack. Right, absolutely be abhorred by it and to object to it. But then we still have to ask the question, if we bomb the country, does it get better or does it get worse? And might there be other alternatives that we can employ that actually get to the same end state, actually a better end state, without using force? Now, why I think this is important is if we think differently, then we can organize differently. See, the problem is when you don't think differently and then you just under-resource the military, you haven't changed the strategy, all you're doing is climbing up on the back of our servicemen and women and their families, because you're just sending them off on rotation after rotation, and then you're going to end up with a generation of folks that are going to be dealing with significant post-traumatic stress. Not to mention all the stress on the family at the moment, and the divorce and all the challenges on families, and then the post-traumatic stress that comes with this as well. So, but if you think differently and you use the military as a deterrent, so that means you need a strong military that's matched to the concept of deterrence. And if you do this, then what you can do is you can actually bring your land forces back to the United States of America. You can condense your command and control. We can all pass the test that we're a republic, but we evidence an empire. When you take a look at the headquarters, we actually have command and control headquarters that are laid down all over the world, the entire globe. And that's not the actions consistent with a republic. And if we condense those headquarters into a joint forces command here in the United States, I argue we could actually be more effective and most certainly save money. So when you actually go forward with this kind of approach, we could actually save a significant amount of money in our defense posture. And keep in mind, when I talk about defense posture, it's not just the Department of Defense, it's the intelligence community. We have increased the intelligence community by a factor of 3 since 9/11, to the point where we have folks inside the intelligence community, they don't even communicate well with each other. We had a situation on Christmas Day of 2009 where in the weeks previous to that, we had a father from East Africa call our country. He was a doctor in East Africa, and he said, "My son, I don't recognize him. He's talking crazy. He could attack your country." And even though we got that call here in the United States, that was never sorted through and analyzed and put into action. That young man, weeks later, got on an aircraft, flew to Europe, got on another aircraft, was en route to Detroit, and he lit himself on fire. And it wasn't the trillions of dollars that we've invested in our national security establishment that saved us. It was the actions of a brave soul in the aircraft that put him out. So, my point is, I've seen this work in Iraq. When we and it gets uncomfortable for commanders, but when you streamline intelligence and you empower down to the lowest level, and then you link intelligence with operations, you can be much more effective, and it's less costly.
Let's talk about, stay on this for a minute, the NSA. How would you reconcile the privacy interest versus security interests in terms of the bulk collection of Americans' phone records?
So we don't have it right. And I will tell you this, that shortly after you sent me to Congress, I think about 6 weeks actually, we took a vote on the reauthorization of the Patriot Act. And it was meant to be a non-controversial vote. They said, well, we're going to put it up on the suspension calendar, which means that it needs 2/3 of members to vote for it because it's quote-unquote non-controversial. So, I said, well, I'm going to have to read this bill. And when I read through the bill, I had a good number of minor problems with the bill, the Patriot Act, but I had 2 significant issues with the Patriot Act. The first is, it was facially unconstitutional as it relates to wiretaps. There's a roving wiretap provision in the Patriot Act that is facially unconstitutional in relation to the Fourth Amendment. The last clause of the Fourth Amendment says you need to get a warrant, you need specificity in terms of person, place, and thing. What the Patriot Act says is that's desired, but not necessary. That if you don't have specificity, then a general description will work. Well, if you believe that, then you've got to change the Constitution. And, the issue is that I used to do this work when I was overseas. This is what we did in Iraq. And so, the argument is, well, since technology has moved so fast, you can't really get a specific description. I don't believe that. That was not my experience. I can tell you that in one of the operations I was on in northern Iraq, in Tal Afar, we carefully put together evidence on this leader of the insurgents. And we went in and we detained him. And his first reaction to me was, he says, "You've waved at me 11 times. And because we carefully put this together. He said, "You've waved at me 11 times. And I said, "On the 12th time, I brought you in." And my point to you is that, we didn't just move on the first piece of evidence that we had on this guy. We built a case. We were able to put human and technical intelligence collection together that was going to be able to get this before a judge in Iraq that was going to put this guy away. So when I have folks tell me, well, this is, a whole new circumstance, and for wiretaps, we can't seem to follow the instructions. My personal experience is I don't believe that. So that's the first major problem with the Patriot Act is that it doesn't comply with that Fourth Amendment. The second problem at the time is what I called out was Section 215 of the business records. The so-called business records allows our government to collect on us, to collect metadata on phone calls, and to be looking at your internet traffic. And, you know, when I looked at this provision, it says that the government shall be authorized to use, in relevant cases, the government shall have this power. So I said, well, what's the legal definition of relevant? And they said, well, you really don't have to worry. This has all been vetted, and it's all fine. I said, well, I mean, you could drive a tank division through this. I mean, this is a wide gaping hole here. So what we learned is that the administration defined relevant as everything. And the reason why is they use the analogy of the haystack in the needle. What they argue is we want to collect everything, and then if we need to, we can go into the haystack and find the needle. Now here's the issue with this, and believe me, I get it from a national security standpoint. I mean, obviously, I bled for this country. I understand what's at stake here. But we can't forget who we are. You know, Franklin had it right. He said, you know, somebody who will give up their liberty for security deserves neither. And, you know, the government doesn't get to collect on us. You have to have a warrant. Our system was set up so that if the government believes we have a case, that the executive has to go before the judicial branch. That's the separation of powers. Because, you know, when they came to try to allay my concerns, they said, well, you have to understand, we have 5 different lawyers look at this. And I said, well, that's fine, but they're all within the executive branch. This has got to go before the judge. This is, you need to have a separation of powers here. And then if the judge thinks that there's probable cause, the judge shall issue a warrant. And with the warrant, you can collect. But short of that, you don't get to collect. This is the problem. This is what's going on right now. And so I'm an co-author of a bill called the Freedom Act. And my goodness, we use these words, we throw these things around, Patriot Act, Freedom Act. We do this too glibly. But I will tell you the essence of this is that it would roll back Section 215. And it would require the government to bring forward this evidence. And why? This is why I think this is really important. Because at the end of the day, I mean, when you look at the Constitution and when you read the Bill of Rights in the Federalist Papers, I mean, these are some of the most summoning words ever put together. But they were also real. The Bill of Rights came from experiences that were foisted upon us. I mean, every single one of those amendments, those were abuses that were actually done to our folks who came before us. Including, I mean, the king, he wouldn't even charge our folks. He just would come in, detain them, and float them out to the water, into the sea. And they would collect on us. They wouldn't allow us to assemble, because if more than 3 people were getting together, they must be up to no good. So, you know, I think we need to stay true to this. This is something that unites us, too. You know, we can debate on a whole number of issues and disagree about a lot. But we all agree, whether you're conservative or liberal, we all agree in our freedoms. So, you know, I want to see us focus on that. I don't think we've got this balance right, and I absolutely believe we can get it right, and we need to get it right.
You talked a lot about stresses in military life, given the service demands. Senator Gillibrand has a bill that she's worked hard to promote that would strip commanders of the ability to go after their troops who are charged with sexual abuse, sexual misconduct offenses. How do you feel about that, given your experience?
Well, I don't think we should take it off the table. What we just did is we just enacted into law a series of provisions that I think are going to make a big difference, because I want to say this, it is unacceptable. Sexual assault in the military is absolutely unacceptable. And we are going to solve this. And what we have done in this bill we've just enacted, the President signed in the last week of December the Defense Policy Bill, and we did a number of things. The first of all is we helped with the confidentiality for those that come forward. We increased training requirements. We eliminated the statute of limitations as it relates to bringing forward these charges. And we stripped from commanders, and I think this was the right thing to do here, we stripped from commanders the right to set aside verdicts. This was a power that I knew that I always had and never used. I believe in our system, that we would, you know, confer charges, that they would go forward, and a jury finds an individual guilty, they're guilty, according to our system. And there's always the right to appeals and everything else. But we eliminated the ability for commanders to set aside verdicts. Now, I've talked to Senator Gillibrand about this. I deeply appreciate her commitment to the issue and her passion for the issue and the extensive amount of time she's invested in learning about this. And I have told her, look, if what we just did, which is the most substantial reform ever taken, what we just enacted about a month and a half ago, if that doesn't work, you know, what she's put on the table, we're going to go there next.
Let's talk about Obamacare. CBO is out with a report a week or so ago saying that, what the number is now, 2.5 million Americans over the next decade will leave the workforce in order to be eligible for benefits